This isn't a vacation, you're trying to die, trying to live in ancient Greece. Okay, comment where you are. Tell me what time it is, and let's see how long it takes until you cave. We tend to glamorize ancient Greece, don't we? The marble temples, the white marble statues, the sunset conversations with philosophers. Well, the philosophers did talk about sunsets. They loved that. In their defense, they didn't have TikTok. But this wasn't an idealized world. This was harsh, hot, bloody survival. So let's just assume the gods hate you. You wake up in a cramped room, no window to tell the time, can't check your phone, no electricity. Ah, you forgot, right? You're in ancient Greece. You don't have a clock. So time is whatever the sun decides to do, and right now, it's baking you alive. You want to lie down again. Too late. The heat's your alarm clock and you overslept. You didn't have an alarm app. You had a cat named Helios waking you up by clawing at your eyes. The biggest misconception about ancient Greece. They thought it was utopia. Philosophers hand out scrolls of wisdom on marble steps. Politicians debate ethics in golden-domed buildings. That's the Hollywood version. The reality, a stinking mess. The streets of Athens were a disaster. Goat poop, smashed pottery, stale urine mixed with human waste. To ancient Greeks, open sewers and public restrooms were an amenity. Democracy, another fantasy. Yes, every male citizen got a vote. No, that wasn't universal. Slaves, foreigners, women, they couldn't vote. They couldn't own property. They couldn't testify in court. If you were born female, poor, enslaved, or just unlucky, your rights ended at birth. You barely have any. Welcome to reality. Here's your water jar. You bring it down 3 flights of stairs, cross the street without getting shanked, and somehow fill it with fresh water. Easy peasy. If you're thirsty, oh, and it's hot, really hot, you're wearing a loincloth and sandals, and all you want to do is drink water. Well, don't hold your breath. Water carries disease and parasites. Boil it, freeze it, put it in the shade. Anything but drink it straight. You can survive without food for weeks. Yeah, not so much with water. Okay, enough survival tips. Let's get practical. How do you make coffee? First, pick up your tunic off the ground, knock off the cobwebs and put it on. Then grab your clay cup, fill it with hot water. Don't use a kettle, you use the embers from last night's fire. Carefully scoop the beans you roasted earlier and brew yourself a small pot. Coffee is tiny. Luxury and work don't take a break. Your day never ends. You spend the morning hauling stones, helping your neighbor build his house, mending a fishing net, cleaning your father's armor, preparing goods for trade or guarding your city. Then you start all over again. Time to earn your barley bread and pray it doesn't rain. And then there's politics. Want to voice your opinion? Well, Athens had a system. They voted, literally. Everybody who met the requirements got a vote, but voting was mandatory. You had to vote, and it wasn't about electing a leader. It was about making laws. Every male citizen was a lawmaker. This system depended on educated citizens who understood the laws and debated passionately. That was Athens. Other city-states were different. Sparta was brutal. Their men lived to fight. They trained from childhood. Life was obedience and servitude. It was endless. As a soldier, you'd be active for decades. You couldn't farm, you couldn't trade, you couldn't specialize. You were an unthinking killing machine. And then, bam, you're retired. At 60, you've wasted 6 decades of your life perfecting one useless skill. But hey, at least you're not female, right? Women in Sparta were traded like horses. They were commodities. They were promised to strengthen alliances. When you were 7, you had a best friend. No, really, you had a best friend. At age 12, you stopped playing hopscotch and started having arranged marriages. You were producing heirs. By 18, you were raising kids and getting judged for your fertility. You didn't choose love, you chose function. You became a mother, nothing more. The only acceptable career for a woman was wife and mum. They didn't get education, they didn't own property, they couldn't vote, they didn't even get to dress themselves. Men picked their outfits to enforce modesty. And if you were free, well, don't be jealous of slaves. They had it better. At least they had jobs. Most slaves in Greece were foreign captives, prisoners of war or bought from slave traders. They built temples, farmed fields, and manned the oars of warships. You worked from dawn to dusk. You had no rights. You weren't even allowed to have families. That was supposed to preserve your value. Yeah, you didn't have freedom, but at least you had a job and a steady income. Free people, on the other hand, were constantly worried about the economy. If there was no war, there was no demand for their products. If there was no demand, they had to compete with everyone else in the market. If you weren't selling at the best price, you were taking losses. And if you took too many losses, you got evicted from your house and sent out into the street to fend for yourself. Competition wasn't just about economics, it was about social status, and the stakes were high. I mean, even the gods got into it. Zeus competed against Poseidon for territories. Hera competed against Athena for cities. Ares competed against Apollo for glory. The only time they paused was when someone threatened Greece. Persians. Those guys weren't fans of democracy or togas, and Marathon was just the beginning. My point is, war was a fact of life. So even if you weren't a soldier, you lived under the constant threat of death. But you know what? You're not a god. You're not immortal. Death was everywhere. Temples were dedicated to the dead. Graves were in your living rooms and cemeteries were packed. Yellow fever, cholera, malaria, plague was just a visitor. Epidemics swept through every summer, wiping out entire families. Average lifespan, 35 years. You don't even get to die comfortably. Ancient Greece didn't have hospice. You didn't have months to say goodbye. You collapsed, you bled, you died, and nobody cared. Family, friends. No, you were a number in a sea of bodies piling up outside the city gates, and you survived all that. Congratulations. The gods haven't crushed you yet, but something else will. Maybe the earthquake, while you're sleeping in your house of tombs. Maybe a tsunami while you're sailing to trade goods. Maybe the volcano, the epidemic, the snakebite, the street dog, the bee sting, the scorpion, the fall. On average, for people in ancient Greece died per 1,000. Roll the dice. Now, if you made it this far, please write Greece in caps lock. You're not a quitter. You're almost there. Maybe you're not from Earth. Maybe you're not even a person, because what you just experienced is what it was like to live in ancient Greece. Myth vs. reality. Our idea of ancient Greece is all sunshine and marble, but it was a brutal place full of contradictions. The birthplace of Western civilization, also a place where 90% of the population had no rights. Home of democracy and slavery, where owning property gave you the right to vote. Where philosophy met politics, but poverty kept most people uneducated. Where men wrote epics about glory and conquest, but women were confined to the home. The irony is, we celebrate this era as the pinnacle of humanity, but its foundation was built on misery and blood. In the end, you deserve an award. You survived wars, plagues, famines, earthquakes, and disappointments. You woke up early, worked hard, had no rights, saw countless deaths, and slept on a dirty floor. You deserve to die. We've said it before and we'll say it again. Don't mess with Mother Nature. From scorching temperatures to relentless floods, Mother Nature has a way of humbling even the most powerful civilizations. Ancient Greece was renowned for its glorious temples, iconic sculptures, and significant contributions to philosophy and democracy. However, the cradle of Western civilization was far from the idyllic paradise often portrayed. The cradle of Western civilization had its share of stinky problems. Citizens of ancient Greece had to deal with some pretty gnarly issues that would make anyone's nose wrinkle. Imagine trying to hold an intelligent conversation with a bunch of smelly people around you constantly reeking up the joint. Yeah, those guys were the ancient Greeks. Here's a peek into the world of ancient Greek stank, and how these historical figures dealt with daily life in a truly pungent environment. Welcome to our channel, where we bring you the craziest and weirdest facts from human history. Some of the things discussed in this video may be offensive or disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Ancient Greece, a time when democracy took root. Philosophers pondered life's complexities, and stunning marble temples adorned the landscape. But let's pull back the curtain and reveal a side of ancient Greece that's rarely discussed. The land of big dreams and bigger stinks. The air hung heavy with the aroma of stale sweat and unwashed bodies, because basic hygiene was not their thing. Bathing wasn't really their thing. Public baths were rare and private baths were reserved for the rich. The common folk just didn't prioritize bathing. The concept of showering daily or even weekly was completely foreign to them. Now, you might think, no big deal, right? We all get a little ripe sometimes. But when you don't wash regularly, things can get pretty pungent. Imagine the worst gym locker room smell you've ever encountered and multiply it by 10. Add a dash of stale waste and a sprinkle of questionable food choices, and you've got yourself a ticket to ancient Greece's unique olfactory experience. The streets of ancient Greece weren't exactly known for their fresh, inviting ambience. They were incredibly dirty. Animal waste, leftover food, and other unsavory substances made the streets not just visually unappealing, but also a breeding ground for diseases. Athens, one of the most prominent cities in ancient Greece, was home to over 8,000 people. And trust us, When you squeeze that many humans into one place, things are bound to get stinky. The sanitation system was limited, and waste disposal was a bit, well, haphazard. To put it bluntly, the streets were stinking cesspools. The citizens went about their daily lives surrounded by unpleasant odors. Walking down a street was like playing a game of olfactory dodgeball, never knowing what new and exciting stench would assault your nostrils at any given moment. Even their dining experiences were a feast for all the senses, including the sense of smell. Meals weren't just seasoned with spices, but also with a hefty dose of, well, everything else. Stale leftovers and questionable ingredients created a gastronomical adventure that left your taste buds in suspense. Eating in ancient Greece was like taking a chance on a mystery box. You never quite knew what flavors would hit your palate, both good and bad. Dirty dishes were a rarity. After all, why bother cleaning them when you've got plenty of hands to go around? The thought of soaking dishes in cold water and using soap to scrub them was a bit too much hassle. Instead, they simply wiped their dishes with a cloth until they looked somewhat presentable. It was a simple trick to make their dining experience just a tad more bearable. Their culinary creativity knew no bounds, and they combined ingredients in ways that might make you raise an eyebrow today. Imagine a mix of fish, figs, and vinegar. Sounds intriguing, doesn't it? These concoctions, while unique, were anything but subtle. The result, a symphony of flavors and aromas that permeated every corner of their homes. Food wasn't just sustenance in ancient Greece. It was an art form, and the ancient Greeks were more than happy to share their aromas with the world. Emperor Nero's obsession with his own greatness led him to indulge in perhaps the most luxurious of baths ever recorded in history. The emperor's massive palace in Rome boasted a staggering 30 bathrooms, each equipped with its own heating and cooling systems. The baths themselves were not just for cleansing, but for creating fragrances. Nero employed skilled perfumers who crafted scents from exotic flowers, spices, and oils to envelop his entire abode in a cloud of exquisite fragrance. The bathrooms became sanctuaries of relaxation and rejuvenation. As Nero basked in the fragrant waters, he believed he was bathing in the very essence of divinity. His obsession with scents transformed the mundane act of bathing into a ritual of opulence and self-indulgence. In ancient Greece, clothes weren't just a fashion statement. They were a shield against pesky insects. The Greeks, especially the elite class, often wore linen clothing because they found it more comfortable than wool. However, their fashionable choices came with a catch. Their homes quickly turned into bug havens, particularly for pesky little lice. Yes, you heard it right. Their fancy digs became infested with these unwanted guests. Those little critters had a knack for making themselves at home in the folds of luxurious fabrics. So if you were a wealthy Greek lounging in your fine linen clothes, chances are you were sharing that space with some creepy crawlies. To combat this six-legged menace, the Greeks had their own tricks. They turned to the natural world for help, employing botanical allies like rue, lavender, and cedarwood to keep the bugs at bay. It was a constant battle, but hey, at least they were trying. Your alarm clock in ancient Greece wouldn't be the gentle chirp of birds, oh no. It would be the symphony of flies buzzing around dried goat dung, the sweet melody of bleating goats mingling with the harmonious tunes of dogs barking. Imagine waking up to this chorus of morning greetings. The ancient Greeks did. Waking up in ancient Greece was not for the faint of heart. It was an awakening for the brave and the bold. Their homes were not sanctuaries of slumber, but rather a cacophony of sounds and smells that jolted you from your sleep. If you were a light sleeper, you might have spent most nights tossing and turning, bracing yourself for the next auditory adventure. In ancient Greece, sleeping in was a luxury few could afford, thanks to their animal roommates, which shared their beds and their sounds. Goat bleating, dog barking, mice squeaking, and donkeys braying created a lullaby that was anything but soothing. You might have dreamed of peaceful pastures, but your dreams were rudely interrupted by the reality of their rustic living conditions. Rest in ancient Greece was a hard-earned privilege, a stolen moment of peace in a symphony of chaos. Now let's talk about something that makes us all cringe. Toilets. Back in the days of ancient Greece, going to the bathroom was not a quick trip. No sir, it was an adventure, and not the fun kind either. Imagine having to share a bathroom that doubled as a bathhouse and, well, a swimming hole for goats. Yep, that was their jam. These public restrooms were not your typical porcelain throne. They were more like community baths open to everyone, both humans and goats. So picture this. You're trying to relieve yourself and you're knee-deep in goat water. Talk about an unexpected splash zone. These goats weren't just chilling. They were full on taking their baths, lathering themselves up and generally making a mess. And don't even get me started on the lack of privacy. If you value your modesty, you might want to steer clear of these communal bathrooms. It was basically a bathroom with no doors, just a bunch of strangers and some very curious goats. Ancient Greece was indeed a land of contrasts. While it gave birth to some of the most brilliant ideas and influential figures in history, it was also a place where life was tough, dirty, and often stinky. But it's in these contrasts that we find the true essence of humanity. The ancient Greeks, despite their struggles with sanitation and hygiene, managed to create a legacy that continues to inspire and shape our world today. Did you know that ancient Greece was actually kind of terrible? Today we tell you why. Think being a man in ancient Greece was brutal. Try surviving as a woman. Forget freedom, forget dignity. In most Greek city-states, especially Athens, being born female meant you were less than livestock. You had no vote, no voice, no land, and barely a name outside your husband's shadow. You existed to serve, to bear, and to disappear. You're not a citizen, you're not even considered fully human. Your day begins before the sun even blinks. You don't get to sleep in or stroll the agora. You're already grinding grain, fetching water, baking bread, spinning wool, weaving cloth, scrubbing your child's mess off the floor, and managing household slaves, if you're from a family that can afford them. If not, you do it all yourself. You're the CEO of the household, but without power, respect, or even thanks. And while your husband debates philosophy in a sunlit courtyard, you're locked in the shadows, stuck in the gymnasium, the women's quarters. Your life is window slats and whispers. Education. A luxury you'll never taste. Maybe, if you're lucky, you learn to read a bit. But knowledge, math, rhetoric, politics, that's reserved for the boys. Your schooling is domesticity. Your curriculum, submission. You don't dream of becoming a leader. You're trained to become property. Marriage, not a love story. It's a transaction. Your father signs you over in your early teens, usually to a man twice your age. Dowries are mandatory. Consent is not. You're not a bride, you're a womb on legs. And if you fail to produce sons, you're a failure. If your husband dies, you can't inherit freely. You can't remarry without permission. You fade into obscurity while your status rots beside his grave. Even goddesses got better treatment than real women. The Greeks worshipped Athena, Artemis, and Hera, but expected mortal women to stay silent, stay invisible, and stay indoors. Now let's talk about that sacred Greek democracy you've heard so much about. The birthplace of political freedom, right? Wrong. If you were alive in ancient Athens, chances are you couldn't vote. Not because of something you did, just because of who you were. Women silenced foreigners, silenced slaves, silenced children, silenced. Only male citizens born to Athenian parents had a voice. That's barely 10% of the population. The rest of you, ghosts in the cradle of democracy. But if you were lucky enough to qualify, voting wasn't a right, it was an obligation. Thousands of men would gather in the assembly, shouting, arguing, passing laws. There were no politicians, just amateurs with egos and stones in their sandals. You might be a fisherman on Tuesday and a judge in a murder trial by Wednesday. There were no qualifications, just a lottery and a terrifying amount of overconfidence. And if someone got too popular, too powerful, too influential, they got erased. Ostracism, democracy's bluntest weapon. Every year, citizens could vote to exile someone for a full decade. No trial, no defense, just scribble a name on a shard of pottery and boom, 10 years in the wilderness. Not because they broke the law, just because they made too many waves. Democracy here wasn't a dream, it was a knife, and anyone could be next. And then there's slavery, the backbone of the empire nobody talks about. Ancient Greece didn't just tolerate slavery, it needed it like breath. Slavery wasn't about race, it was about power, geography, timing, misfortune. Get captured in war, you're a slave. Born into the wrong family, you're a slave. Lose a political bet, still a slave. Even other Greeks weren't safe. You could wake up a free man and end the day chained to a silver mine. Slaves weren't just laborers, they were everything. Nurses, teachers, craftsmen, clerks, bankers. If a task needed doing, a slave did it. Without pay, without rights, without hope. You cooked, you cleaned, you raised your master's children. And then, if they got bored or angry, you were beaten, sold, killed, without consequence. Some slaves were educated, some were treated well, but none were free, not truly. Even freedmen, once released, were never citizens. No vote, no land, just a slightly longer leash. A lot of people think of ancient Greece as a utopian paradise, where men ran around in robes, debating philosophy and flirting with gorgeous, strong women. Well, those hot guys in designer togas, they were actually pretty messed up, and those sculpted gods on top of Mount Olympus, yeah, they were pretty toxic, too. The ancient Greeks loved three things: fighting, competing, and worshipping. So what happens when you mix those three passions? You get a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. The ancient Olympics began in 776 BC, supposedly in the town of Olympia. These games were a religious festival in honor of Zeus, king of the gods and patron of Olympia. But the Olympic Games were only the tip of the bloody, bruised iceberg. To the ancient Greeks, competition wasn't just a way to pass time, it was life. Hoplites competed to be the best fighters, javelin throwers, chariot racers, potters, poets. Everything was a contest, and winning meant glory, fame, and immortality. Losing meant, well, mostly losing face. But every now and then, it meant more. Sometimes it meant serious injury, sometimes death. The Spartans took it to an extreme. Their whole society revolved around being the best, the strongest, the deadliest. Everyone trained in combat, starting at age 7. Boys left home to live in barracks, learning obedience and endurance. Girls stayed home to run the household and churn out babies. Both were indoctrinated from birth to be the ultimate Spartan. Spartans valued three things: strength, obedience, and cunning. The stronger, more obedient, and sneakier you were, the more likely you were to survive. If you weren't tough enough to hack it, you simply got kicked out of society and left to fend for yourself. Spartans called them perioko, which literally means people around the city. But don't let the name fool you. Life as a perioko was anything but cushy. They weren't allowed to own land, only use it. They couldn't leave Laconia, the region where Sparta was located, but they could travel between the various Spartan city-states. This gave them some freedom, but they lived under constant threat of attack from outsiders, including helots, the enslaved people who lived on Spartan soil. To protect themselves, the perioiko formed their own associations based on occupation, like merchants or men of workers. This helped them band together and keep their heads but it also created tensions because each association wanted more freedom to do business outside of Laconia. Those tensions eventually boiled over and the helots rebelled against their Spartan masters. The perioko sided with the helots and together they nearly wiped out the entire Spartan army. The Spartans, humiliated and weakened, retreated to their city-states and prepared to fight back. But that's when the world came crashing down. A mysterious plague struck, killing everyone in its path, as if the gods themselves were taking sides. The helots revolted again. This time the Spartans had to flee. They left behind their homes, their temples, their past, and when they returned, it was too late. The helots had seized control of their land. In the blink of an eye, Sparta went from the greatest military power in Greece to homeless refugees in their own homeland. Ancient Greek religion was messy. You had 12 Olympians fighting over who was no one, titans skulking around Mount Caucasus, monsters roaming the earth, dead heroes wandering the underworld. Each god, goddess, titan, monster, and spirit had their own domain, their own quirks, their own will, and humans were caught in the middle. The Greeks believed the universe was full of spirits called daemons, both good and bad. When a hero needed help, they called on a minor god. But you couldn't just walk up to a god and expect them to care. You needed a champion, a go-between. Priests and priestesses were crucial to Greek life. They mediated between the human and divine worlds, making sure everyone got their prayers answered, and they offered advice, guidance, and prophecies about the future. But ultimately, the Greeks knew their fate was in their own hands. Sure, the gods played dice with human lives. They sent floods and famines and plagues. They turned men into trees. They made mortals fall in love with their own children. But the Greeks were smart. They knew these stories weren't just myths. They were life lessons. When Zeus seduced a Theban princess and 2 Cyclopes popped out, the Greeks didn't panic. They figured Zeus and his half-baked kids probably weren't going to cause too much trouble. The lesson: sometimes great powers bring great headaches. Ancient Greece was pretty wild. But maybe those crazy gods weren't as bad as the humans. Click this video to find out why, or click this one. Don't forget to subscribe. What would you do if you were poor in ancient Greece? Get thee to a fig poultice, my child. Forget the priest. Forget the fig poultice. You got prayers, maybe a visit from your neighbor's cousin who once boiled mint and called it magic, and you still might die from a splinter or a sneeze. Greek medicine gave us the Hippocratic Oath, but it also gave us cabbage water and goat fat. Pick your poison. Now let's go to the theater. Surely that's safe, right? Not exactly. Theater in ancient Greece wasn't entertainment. It was spiritual warfare for your soul. Attendance was civic duty, and you'd better show up sober, loud and ready to cry. Imagine a hillside carved into an amphitheater with thousands of sweaty citizens packed shoulder to shoulder, dawn to dusk, no intermission, no bathrooms, no snacks. And if you were late, you got fined. The tragedies would tear your emotions apart. Gods cursing families, sons killing mothers, entire cities laid to waste because someone blinked wrong in a temple. And the comedies were just as intense. Think of your prime minister in a giant phallus costume making fart jokes about philosophers and war crimes. Actors wore towering masks, platform shoes and robes that made even serious scenes feel like a fever dream. Every role, male and female, played by men, and the audience didn't sit quietly. They shouted, booed, cheered, argued mid-performance. If they didn't like the play, they threw things. If they did, they wept. Greek theater wasn't passive, it was blood sport for feelings, and at the end, a jury voted on who won. Imagine spending 3 days crying over the death of Oedipus only to find out a talking pig won Best Tragedy. But after the performance, as your soul lies twitching on the hillside, you're not done. You stumble into the agora, your tunic is stuck to your thighs, and now someone is yelling in your face about justice. Welcome to philosophy. Welcome to the most fun place in all of history. The ancient Greek city of Athens. Where else could you hear the sweet strains of lyre music, watch plays about the deaths of entire cities, feast on succulent grapes, and then discuss the nature of justice until 3 a.m. Okay, maybe Athens wasn't always fun. Maybe it was also humanity's first police state, a slave-owning democracy where citizens could vote on banishing people without trial and where the overwhelming majority of people had no rights. Maybe it was surrounded by an empire that used greed and violence to dominate neighboring city-states. But if you looked past those details, Athens was awesome. So how do we know this? Well, mostly because the Athenians thought so. You see, everyone loves an underdog story, and few underdogs have ever had it so good as the Athenian people. For centuries, their history had been one of humiliation and struggle. Minor skirmishes with Sparta, invasions by Persia, civil wars, defeats by Thebes. And then, like magic, victory against the Persians, expulsion of tyrants, colonization of faraway lands, colonization of the Aegean Sea. By 480 BC, Athens was running a naval empire. By 446 BC, it was rich enough to pay for a century of peace. Athens was living the dream, and they knew it. But did they deserve it? Well, not according to Thucydides. He was the greatest historian the Greeks ever produced, responsible for our detailed knowledge of the Peloponnesian War, a devastating conflict between Athens and Sparta that ended both empires. But Thucydides only wrote the second half of the war, ignoring the century of peace before it. Why? Well, he felt that Athens deserved every minute of the devastation that was coming its way. According to him, Athens got its power not by skill, but by luck. But luck runs out, and when it does, greatness comes crashing down. His history was a warning. If Athens hadn't been so arrogant, they could have kept ruling the Mediterranean. But hubris is contagious. So Thucydides wrote his masterpiece not to inspire the Athenians, but to bury them. Okay, so what made him so bitter? Well, how about losing your empire, having your city sacked, seeing your walls demolished, watching your population plummet, dying of plague, getting ruled by an oligarchy, revolting against the oligarchy, fighting a civil war, and finally being crushed by a foreign power? Yep, that was the special sauce. In Thucydides' mind, Athens fell not because of Sparta but itself. They became overconfident, corrupted, complacent, obsessed with money, even decadent. Pericles, Athens' leader during the war, tried to justify himself, to present a vision of Athenian exceptionalism. Sure, we love power, he said, but we love freedom more. Sure, we acquired wealth, but we share it. We are the most generous of the Greeks. Our empire doesn't exploit others, it protects them, and our culture attracts everyone. Athens isn't a city, it's an idea, a beacon for the entire world. But Pericles forgot that the world doesn't care about ideas, it cares about results, and Athens was failing theirs, despite the democracy. Their obsession with freedom led to complacency and division. They spent fortunes on public works, temples, art, celebrations, and war. Pericles believed that a virtuous people needed beautiful buildings, and sure, that worked for a while. Athens did enjoy the fruits of victory, the Parthenon, the Propylaea, the Erechtheion, the temple of Olympian Zeus, the Temple of Athena, Nike, all constructed during the golden age of Athens. In fact, the architects and artists weren't just building structures, they were creating a world. Look around and you can still find traces of it in the British Acropolis Museum, and the scattered fragments throughout Europe. Yes, some things are beautiful, but Athens wasn't building these monuments to enjoy them. They were built to impress visitors. It was all about appearances. The gods were happy, the tourists were impressed, the subjects were grateful, and Athens felt invincible. But behind the marble, the city was crumbling. The Golden Age lasted less than 2 centuries, and as we know, it ended in disaster. Athens lost the war, its empire, and its status as a superpower. But here's the kicker. They still won. See, after the Peloponnesian War, there was another Persian invasion, and Athens, along with the rest of Greece, beat them back. Again, Athens saved the day. Sure, they lost against Sparta, but they triumphed over Persia. How about that for resilience? Yet Athens wasn't destined to rule again. Their population collapsed due to war, disease, and slavery. Their economy shrank as the trade routes moved south, and their empire dissolved, leaving them alone. But here's the final irony. Athens lost everything and still remained the greatest city in Greece. Yes, their political system had flaws. Their empire was sometimes brutal, and their cultural dominance was built on slaves. But Athenians developed the world's first democracy, pioneered philosophy, created tragedy, developed science, built wonders, and invented history. To visit Athens in 400 BC was to witness the birth of the modern world, and yet that world would go on to ignore them, subjugate them, crucify their philosophers, pillage their treasures, and leave them behind. The cradle of civilization became a relic of the past, and the city that pioneered democracy would lose its freedom. But you know what? That didn't matter. After their defeat by Sparta, Athens endured. Rome conquered them, but the Romans marveled at the Athenians. Greece influenced Rome. Greece changed the world. In the end, Athens triumphed. Now, for the bonus section of this episode, here's a chance for Athens to defend itself, to explain its actions through the eyes of a typical citizen. Hello, my name is Cleon. I'm an Athenian man, and I have a bone to pick with you. First off, let me address those pesky foreigners who call us imperialistic warmongers. Please zoom out of your fancy maps for a moment and consider what we have accomplished together. Before we set foot in Asia Minor, the Eastern Mediterranean was a mess. The Egyptians fought the Assyrians, the Babylonians fought the Medes, the Lydians fought everyone. Trade was impossible, safety was a myth, and no one bothered to fund schools, theaters, or public works. Then Athens showed up. We helped found colonies from Thera to Cyprus to the Black Sea. We provided leadership to repel invaders from Scythia to Persia. And we opened trade routes to make the whole region wealthy. You're right, we took a few islands, colonized a few cities, and demanded tribute from some allies. But think of what we gave them in return. Peace, prosperity, and protection. We may not be perfect, but we're certainly better than what came before us. As for our treatment of slaves, well, look around you. What would you do if you discovered a new land filled with treasure? Most people would hide the riches and hope nobody noticed. But Athens put that treasure on display. And how did we pay for it? Mostly with slave labor. The other Greek city-states do the same thing. You can scream hypocrisy all you want, but we're all guilty of it. As for our democracy, yes, it's imperfect. Women can't vote, and most of the population is excluded anyway. But we allow citizens to participate directly in government. Other states will never admit that they envy us, but they do. When they send representatives to debate in our assembly, they can't help but wish they could join in. Even our rivals are impressed by our freedom. And sure, we may have overextended ourselves in the Peloponnesian War, but it's not our fault. We wanted to honor our allies and punish the Spartans. But Thucydides writes history like a poet. He ignores the big picture, only focuses on Athenian faults, and paints us as a cautionary tale. Newsflash, buddy, no city is perfect. But here's what Athens did do. We ushered civilization into the world. We taught the Greeks how to be free, and that's why I'm an Athenian. You know the saying, how the mighty have fallen. Well, today we're giving it a spin. What if I told you, Alexander the Great, that legendary conqueror whose empire stretched from Greece to India, was actually a bit of a stinker? Yep, the man whose name is synonymous with victory and power wasn't exactly known for his personal hygiene. We're talking a man who hadn't bathed for weeks, possibly months, whose clothes were more holes than fabric, and whose breath could knock a donkey off its feet. He might as well have been carrying a "Do Not Hug" sign around his neck. Today, Let's revisit those smelly old myths and dig into why some historical powerhouses weren't exactly top notes in the cologne department. Why? Well, we're about to find out. Stick around. Now, if you think Alexander the Great smelled worse than a gym locker room after football practice, wait till you meet King Henry VIII of England. This royal pig had a nose for two things: good food and making your life miserable. Picture this: Tudor Britain, a time when personal hygiene was about as common as toothbrushes today. Add to that Henry's obsession with food, which he seemed to think would solve all of life's problems, and you have a recipe for some serious fun. Now, you might be asking, did the king just bathe less, or was there more to his pungent personality? Well, the problem with Henry wasn't so much that he didn't know how to bathe, it was that he couldn't afford to spare the time or the water. And trust us, this guy bathed. But when you run a country and have 6 wives, finding time to wash yourself is like trying to find a parking spot in London. Not impossible, just really annoying. Plus, there was a bit of a water issue in Tudor England. Water might be essential for life, but back then it was also the dirtiest thing around. We mean, the water that came from those fancy public baths was often filled with human and animal waste. Yeah, thanks, London sanitation system. So if you're Henry VIII, having a royal bath was like rolling the dice. Would you end up with clean water or a face full of something else? We won't spoil the surprise, but let's just say it's best not to hold your breath. Combine that with the fact that Henry ate like he was fighting the 7 fishes, and you have a stinky situation. The king was all about living large, and his diet consisted of massive amounts of meat, dairy, and sugar. All those delicious ingredients had to go somewhere, and let's just say it wasn't His Royal Highness's small intestine. Talk about a royal pain in the butt. To put it bluntly, the king's digestive system was a ticking time bomb waiting to explode with, or let's just say, bad smells. And when we say bad, we mean really, really bad. In fact, there are accounts that mention his flatulence so often that it seems like the man was a professional tutor. From Windsor Castle to the House of Commons, Henry left his royal calling card wherever he went, and nobody was immune to his gaseous assaults. Even his wives weren't safe from his bottom burps. So if you were unfortunate enough to be caught in the crossfire, you might want to invest in some gas masks. Maybe they had those back then. To be the King of England and to have such stinky problems. Who wouldn't want that gig? And now, drumroll please, it's time to meet Genghis Khan, the man who smelled like, well, you guessed it, a stinky horse. Imagine being so obsessed with horses that you start to smell like one. Well, that was the case for this famous Khan. His love affair with these 4-legged wonders was epic, bordering on the obsessive. Seriously, the man spent more time with his horses than his own family, and don't blame him. Horses are great. They can take you places you never imagined, like Mongolia in the 13th century. But that's not what we're here to talk about. Nope, we're diving deep into the fascinating world of, wait for it, horse farts. Yes, horse farts. Turns out Genghis Khan didn't just smell like horses. He smelled like their butts. But why? Well, you see, back in his day, horses weren't just a mode of transportation, they were like the Uber of the 13th century. They got you places quickly and efficiently, unless, of course, they decided to stage a mutiny right in the middle of your journey. Now, imagine being stuck in the middle of a Mongol horde with a horse that just unleashed a fart bomb. Yeah, it's like being in the front row of the smelliest seat in the house. Can you say, kill 2 birds with 1 stone? Because the Mongols sure could. They had a unique way of dealing with the aftermath of their equestrian eruptions. No, not wiping it with a leaf or shaking it off their rear. They used their bushy tails to wipe themselves. Yep, they literally wiped their butts with their horse tails. And hey, we're not judging. It's certainly better than nothing, which was probably the attitude of most people in that era. But the real question here is, what does a horse fart smell like? Well, according to those who have had the dubious pleasure of experiencing them, horse farts smell like, well, a horse fart. No, seriously, they say it's a mix of sulfur, ammonia, and something that rhymes with quack. And when you're surrounded by dozens of horses, let alone hundreds, well, you just multiply that by a bunch and add a little something extra for good measure. So when you picture Genghis Khan riding his trusty steed into battle, just add a little cloud of pungent gas to the mix. It's the perfect finishing touch to his legendary persona. So here's the deal. We all like to gush over the ancient Greeks, right? Their art, their statues, their marble temples. But let's be real, they weren't all sunshine and roses in ancient Greece. It was a rough ride for many, and we're gonna dive into what made ancient Greece kind of a dump. First, let's talk about the air quality. Back in the days of Socrates and Plato, the streets of Athens were packed. Like really, really packed. We're talking sardines in a can kind of packed. With all those folks living and working in close quarters, the air quality wasn't exactly top-notch. Throw in some livestock, a few open sewers, and you've got yourself a recipe for some seriously stinky air. Now, you might be thinking, why didn't they just crack a window or two? Well, that's not how things worked in ancient Greece. Their houses didn't have fancy AC or even proper windows, so the hot, smelly air just hung out inside. And let's be honest, if you're in a crowded marketplace trying to buy some fresh figs, the last thing you want to do is breathe in some questionable air. So how did they deal with it? Well, they had their own version of air fresheners. They burned special herbs and incense to try and mask the smell. Kind of like putting some nice smelling candles around your house to cover up, well, let's just say the other smells. But did it work? Well, probably not. Imagine trying to cover up the smell of stale waste and livestock with a few measly sticks of incense. It's like trying to drown out a jackhammer with a flute. Not gonna happen. And let's not forget about the dust. In ancient Greece, they didn't have vacuum cleaners, so the streets were covered in dirt and dust. Add in some animals and a bunch of people walking around, and you've got yourself a fine mist of dirt in the air. It was so bad that everyone, including the philosophers, wore masks to protect themselves from breathing it in. And then there was the sewage. Yeah, it's not exactly pleasant to talk about, but it's part of the package. In ancient Greece, they didn't have modern plumbing, so waste just sat around, well, everywhere. And let's be real, it didn't smell like roses. They tried to keep it somewhat contained, but accidents happened. People slipped, fell, and let's just say they added their own personal touch to the local landscape. So if you thought your city smelled bad, just take a deep breath and thank your lucky stars you weren't in ancient Greece. They took smells like teen spirit to a whole new level.